NAMB's funding hook. That's the topic, because what we've discovered is that NAMB, or the North American Mission Board of the Southern Baptist Convention, has been recruiting outside of Southern Baptist. Now, the way this came about, the way it came to our knowledge at least, was in the SBC Issues Facebook group. A California pastor commented that Southern Baptist, through the North American Mission Board, had been recruiting independent Baptists in California. So I inquired and began doing some digging and interacted with this pastor for a few moments. And he said there was a publication that had been published by a well-known independent Baptist pastor about this very topic. In fact, it was basically the exclusive topic of this book. Well, it's not a large book. It's about 70 pages or so, but it's called Funding Your Church Plant. And the Funding Your Church Plant, the subtitle is, Should an Independent Baptist Accept Funds from the SBC? Now, the author is Dr. Paul Chappell. He is a lifelong independent Baptist, as I said, very well known among independent Baptists, a speaker at a lot of their conferences. He has a daily radio program that aired in a number of stations across the country. He is pastor of Lancaster Baptist Church in Lancaster, California. And they have a ministry there that publishes materials for independent Baptist churches called Striving Together. Now, I'm about to read you a couple of segments out of it. I don't want to spend a lot of time doing it, but just enough to give you a flavor. I have put a copy of this. It's a PDF copy, but I have put a copy of it in the SBC Issues group. And you can pull that up. And if you go to the SBC Issues group, click the little search icon and then type in the word recruiting and search, and you should be able to find it pretty easily that way. But Pastor Chappell, like I said, he wrote this book, and it's divided into several sections. And let me just read you some of the sections of it. His contention is that the North American Mission Board is basically recruiting independent Baptists, and he identifies two different ways they're doing it. One, by approaching planters directly. They've come up with the name somehow, and they've called them directly and made offers to help fund their new church. And the other is by making presentations in church planter groups, whether it be a conference or some other type of a group. They've identified these independent Baptists. And of course, if you've planted a church, as I have, and many of you may have as well, you realize that every penny is valuable. It's tough planning a church, and raising the money to do that is a huge deal. So to have $1,000, $2,000 a month coming in as a stipend is what it basically is. It's not enough to fund the entire plant, but enough to do that. Then that's a huge deal. And so it's a good bit of enticement, I guess you could say, at that point, if you look at it that way. But let me read you just a couple of pieces. His book was actually written in 2003 is the publication date on it. So just so you're aware when it came out. So it's been out a couple of years. I just wasn't aware of it. So let me give you a couple of things. This is right out of his book. This is toward the beginning on page 6. He simply says, over recent months, some church planters have asked me about the assistance they have been offered by representatives of the North American Mission Board, NAMB, of the Southern Baptist Convention. They have either been approached directly by the representatives of NAMB or introduced at meetings where the host presents the SBC funding and affiliation as an option for assistance. Let me pause just a moment. Notice what it said, SBC funding and affiliation, because these are not SBC people. The people in these conferences are not SBC. And that's what he's saying. Okay, he continues. These church planters or replanters are told that if they simply sign to agree with SBC doctrine and provide some support back to the convention, they can receive funds from NAMB. It seems to them an expedited process for getting engaged in the work of church planting to which God has called them, and they have asked what I think. Now, he goes on to explain in quite a bit of length why he disagrees with this option. But let me give you just another sentence out of another paragraph on the next page. It says, when it comes to independent Baptist church planters today being offered and receiving funds from NAMB, there are significant reasons that I do not encourage this partnership, which I would like to share with you in these pages. Now, I will say this just real quickly. He has a very extensive bibliography at the end of this. It's about 9 pages long, if I remember right. And on that, he details lots of different publications, things out of the North American Mission Board agreement that church planters sign about their conduct and what they agree to do and all that kind of thing, and a number of other things. Anyway, it's well documented, and for somebody who's trying to get caught up to speed on some of the things happening with the North American Mission Board, he actually details many of those things, in addition to some of the other controversies that have been happening among Southern Baptists, the women pastors, and just the long list of that, he goes on to say. Now, on page 12, he says this: from my from my conversations with those who have been approached by NAMB, it seems they are under 2 inaccurate impressions. First, that the SBC is fully conservative in doctrine and practice, with all churches and SBC entities aligning with the Baptist Faith and Message doctrinal statement. As much as I wish this were true, it is not, as you'll see throughout the next few pages. Second, the funds from NAMB are more or less free money without a significant commitment to the SBC as a whole. This is also inaccurate. Church planters who receive funds from NAMB are understandably required to give money back to the SBC. In fact, they are, I skipped. In fact, the official list of expectations for NAMB church planters includes this, quote, lead church plant in a minimum of 10% missions giving, minimum 6% to the SBC cooperative program, and 4% to other SBC Great Commission causes. Thus, church planters who receive money from NAMB are choosing to plant an SBC church, and their church plant will be tied to the SBC for years to come. Now, a couple of things to note. He's not Southern Baptist. He doesn't have a lot of depth in Southern Baptist polity, that kind of thing. So let me make a couple of clarifications. First, there is no such thing as an SBC member church. If you're in a church that says we're SBC, they're not saying that they are a member of the SBC. The SBC has no member churches nor members. At that point, the SBC has churches only that are affiliated with the SBC. They are cooperating churches. That's why when a church is, as it's called, disfellowshipped or disaffiliated over a doctrinal issue or something else, it's because all they're saying is, we will no longer fellowship with you. They're not kicking them out as member churches because there are no member churches or church plants as far as that goes. Although a new church oftentimes, in fact, most times, comes in under the umbrella of a mother church. They call it now a send church, a sponsoring church. There are a lot of terms that can be used. But a lot of times that church plant comes in under that umbrella to start with until they step out on their own. They get constituted, all that kind of thing on their own. But every Southern Baptist affiliated church is each one individually independent, self-governing, autonomous congregations. So they are not under an umbrella of the SBC. And in fact, many Southern Baptist churches don't necessarily identify themselves directly with the Baptist faith and message. They identify with some other doctrinal statement or creed, but yet the idea is churches affiliate and cooperate with the Southern Baptist Convention by having a doctrinal statement that is pretty similar to and close to what the Baptist faith and message is. So that's the idea. Now, the big question here that I have, and I have for all NAMB funded plants, and that is, how many church plants remain affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention once their funding runs out? And this is not just my curiosity about these independent Baptists, but it's something that I've dealt with for decades now as I've worked with church plants. When we were talking to churches that were wanting to plant a church, we wanted to make sure they were identifying as Southern Baptist, and we wanted the planter to come out of one of our Southern Baptist churches. And my preference was that that person had been in a Southern Baptist church for at least a couple of years so that they had a full, clear understanding of a Southern Baptist congregation and the kind of doctrine, et cetera, at that point. So real important to understand. Like I said, my big question is, doesn't matter where their background is, when the funding runs out, even for those that come out of Southern Baptist congregations, when the funding runs out, do they stay affiliated? And that is a question NAMB has refused to answer when it has been asked. They have refused to give any of those kind of information or that kind of information when it's been asked of them. Now, let's jump up to page 46 in this document. On page 46, he says, and this is a personal testimony. Several years back, David Azzarello, I believe that's how he says his name, David Azzarello, a man I saw come to Christ over 30 years prior, felt God calling him to resign the pastorate where he served and begin a full-time church planting ministry. As he shared this burden with others, he was soon approached by representatives from NAMB, offering to support him as a church planter. The offer they made was for a modest monthly salary with the stipulation that the churches he planted would be SBC churches and give 10% of their budget back to the SBC, which is understandable. Continued. He called me to discuss their offer. I shared with him my concerns over the SBC cooperative program and encouraged him to follow the historic independent Baptist model of raising support from individual churches. Cut it short, that's what he ended up doing. He didn't end up going with it. The point he's making is this was one person that he knew well, he trusted, had a lot of integrity, had known him for more than 30 years, and NAMB had approached him to ask if he would begin planting churches on NAMB's behalf as such and receive a stipend. Now, NAMB should not be recruiting from independent Baptist churches or their planters or any other group as far as that goes. But we know this has happened at other times. The one that first comes to mind right off is at McLean Bible Church in Virginia. That's where David Platt went after he left International Mission Board. And you may have seen some of the controversy around McLean, but when Platt was there, they had a network called New City Network, became New City Church Planting Network. And through that network, the North American Mission Board funneled millions and millions of dollars to go to church plants. And I don't remember exactly how many. I didn't research all that, but I remember there were dozens and dozens of church plants that were planted through McLean Bible Church. Now, McLean Bible Church is not an SBC church, although David Platt did mislead the congregation, I guess it's fair to say, and actually went to the Southern Baptist Convention as a messenger from McLean, as they had somehow or another kind of deceived the executive committee and whoever else in credentialing that the church had agreed to become a Southern Baptist church. Whole nother story. Let's don't get into all that. What we know is they are not Southern Baptists. In their constitution, they say, we will not be a part of any denomination, not just Southern Baptists, but any denomination. And that's their declarative statement from their bylaws. Now, this church planting network that McLean was a part of and the key partner in, this is where all this money from the North American Mission Board came. And through that and McLean and these plants, they gave back to the North American Mission Board. And this came out in a lawsuit there at McLean from some church members. And that's when it was discovered that this money was going to the North American Mission Board, and the North American Mission Board was giving millions to these church plants. So we know that the North American Mission Board has recruited and has worked with other non-Southern Baptist networks before, and that is a huge concern. Now, to wrap this up, at the end of the day, this isn't about turf wars. I think, to be honest, one of the reasons why they may be interested in recruiting somebody who's an independent Baptist, many independent Baptists are known to be extremely evangelical. They're reaching people for Jesus. And so maybe that's one of the reasons. I don't know. But it's not about turf wars. It's about clarity. It's about conviction. And it's about cooperation among Southern Baptists. The evidence raises serious concerns. This that the Pastor Chappell brings up here, what he says concerns me deeply, and I hope concerns you. The questions that are raised here, that NAMB is recruiting independent Baptist church planters and promising our Southern Baptist mission dollars to go to non-Southern Baptist pastors. It's been done before. It's apparently been done. It was done prior to this book being written in 2023 and probably done since. I don't have a testimony since. But while I may differ with some of Pastor Chappell's conclusions and some of the things he has stated about the Southern Baptist Convention, many of which I know he's out of touch because he doesn't understand Southern Baptist. But I will say this. I share his conviction that the North American Mission Board should not, let me re-say that, North American Mission Board should not be planting churches that are with non-Southern Baptist church planters. They should only be helping to plant churches that are SBC churches, not recruiting outside of them. Now, just for clarification, North American Mission Board doesn't plant churches. Churches plant churches. Every church that's planted and the North American Mission Board funds, they're required to have a mother church, a sending church, a sponsor church as such, to have some accountability and all that. Okay. But once this boundary has gone down, once it's been crossed, then the question becomes unavoidable. Where are the boundaries? If they'll recruit independent Baptists, will they recruit Anglicans? What about Presbyterians? What about United Methodists? Where does it stop? Maybe there are some non-denominationalist, is that a word? Non-denominations planters. Where will they stop? You see, our mission dollars are not out there just simply to be able to fund any and every church planter, but is the North American Mission Board seeking to bump up their church plant numbers by recruiting outside of Southern Baptists. It's a real concern. I hope it's a concern for you as well. NAMB's funding hook outside of SBC is a huge, huge concern. We'll keep in touch with this. I have reached out to some of those involved in some independent Baptist networks to see if I can find out more. If so, maybe we'll get an interview with some of them. Thank you for joining. We'll check back again when we find out a little bit more.